which is how do you switch from getting a regular paycheck to now withdrawing from your savings?
No matter what a client is invested in, we want them to understand what those investments do, how they act, and then also how they play a part in their overall portfolio. When you are more active, so that you have more flexibility and you can truly enjoy your nest egg that you've worked so hard to attain. Welcome to the podcast, Retirement Done Right, hosted by David Rath and Pat Kalish. We tackle various topics such as retirement, Social Security, taxes, estate planning, wealth planning, and more. If you have further questions or want to learn more, we would love to hear from you. You can reach us at contwealth.com. Please note that the information discussed on this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute professional advice. Listeners should not act upon the information or content without first seeking the advice of a licensed financial professional.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Retirement Done Right. I'm here with Pat Kalish, my co-host, and we're going to be talking today about how do you pay yourself in retirement. Last episode, we touched on projecting out what those spending needs might be, but then once you get to retirement, how exactly do you switch from getting a regular paycheck from your job to now taking a paycheck from your investments or some other sources? So, Pat, happy to have you back on the show. We're going to be on the show together. So, how's everything?
It's going good. Here's what I will tell our audience that have been following along. They know that I'm moving up to Saratoga Springs with my wife. We put our first house on the market just yesterday. We've got like 200 views and like 67 loves or likes, on Zillow. So things are progressing. We're going to do an open house in 2 weeks. If anyone's interested in a house in Elverson, let me know. One's on the market and I would say it's beautiful. So.
Well, that's what your realtor says to say. So we'll let the market forces decide as far as your outcome.
That's the CFA response. The CFP response is like, come on in. It's beautiful. We've got a great yard.
It's all supply and demand at the end of the day.
Yeah, amen to that.
So as I said at the intro, the issue that we're going to be talking about today is one that most everybody has to touch upon at some point in their life, which is how do you switch from getting a regular paycheck to now withdrawing from your savings? And so the biggest concern, I think, for people is not only the actual mechanics of getting that money, but also now you're worried about tying into the last episode, the amount of money that you would potentially need. And then how do you deal with taxes? How do you deal with overspending? How do you deal with underspending? All of that is going to tie into how do you start paying yourself in retirement?
All right.
So the biggest takeaway from all of this stuff is going to be that there's not really a one size fits all to what we're doing here. And Pat, why don't you lead us off, start talking about the different sources of money that a retiree can draw upon when they start taking money from their investments.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to kind of touch on what you just discussed, David, I think this is such a difficult transition for a retiree. You were collecting a paycheck your whole life, you were diligently saving, and now you leave your employer and you actually have to create your own paycheck. So it's just like a totally different mindset that you need to have. I think having a plan is important, and just being aware of, some of those common concerns is valid. But if you have the right plan, I think you're going to be in a really great spot. When thinking about, I would say, the different types of buckets of accounts that you can pull from, this is an extremely important topic, right? Because you might have a taxable account, which is filled with, stocks, ETFs, and you have to worry about capital gains when you're starting to take those distributions. You might have a tax deferred account. Think of like maybe your 401k or a traditional IRA. At that point, when you're taking those distributions, that's all considered ordinary income. And then finally, you might have a Roth, style account where everything is actually coming out tax-free. And, the rule of thumb is typically start with your taxable account, then move into your tax deferred account, and then finally your Roth IRA. But there's things that you really need to think through, like, IRMA or the taxation of Social Security that needs to be a part of the plan so that you have a very tax efficient withdrawal come retirement.
And you mentioned Irma, and this is going to tie into like a later discussion, especially as we start to talk about healthcare.
Yep.
Irma is essentially just an additional amount that somebody would pay for Medicare based on income levels. And so if you are withdrawing from something that's going to boost your income level, now you have to worry about boosting it to a point where you're also paying an additional amount to Medicare for your premiums. And so that is a whole another
Yeah.
discussion. But the big takeaway here is that you're probably going to have different areas of money or different buckets, as you said, to draw upon. And being smart about where you take that money from, at what time, and then also we'll harp on this all the time, and that is to plan out your future distribution over a long period of time instead of just
Definitely.
going at it year by year. Because if you attack things on a year by year basis, now you're not necessarily limiting the amount of taxes that you pay over the entirety of your retirement. You're just paying whatever taxes you owe in that year with not really much planning that goes into it. So, coordination of all of your taxable buckets or different taxation type buckets is going to be so important. And again, we can probably talk about this in another episode as well. And I did an episode with Sarah Dorsey, a CPA, about Roth conversions, but that's
Mhm.
also going to factor in. So taking money out and converting it that you don't need in that year, paying those taxes, and being intentional about limiting that tax liability throughout your years.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you brought up the whole idea of like doing this on a long-term scale. Retirement can be 30, 40 years for somebody, and running those cash flow analysis out, over an extended amount of time can really help you plan for the future. Because something like Irma, that's based on a 2-year look back. So moves that you made 2 years ago could affect your cash flows 2 years, thereafter. You really have to keep that in mind, and I think having a long-term plan is important. Now we know things are gonna change, life is gonna evolve, but having that set up is very important.
And if you look at the distinction of variable and stable sources, that's I think the best starting spot. So obviously, you have your invested money, you probably save to a 401k plan or something similar, and that's going to be a variable source of money. And what I mean by that is it's going to fluctuate in value as it's invested in stocks and bonds and things like that.
Yep.
Stable sources of income are going to be any pensions that people have, Social Security. If you have an annuity that you're planning to annuitize, those are going to be quote unquote guaranteed sources of money that you're not really going to be surprised by the amount of money that you see on a regular basis. And so, blending those two things is a really important function, not only of meeting your regular income needs, but also playing into the behavioral finance side of things where if you are forced to draw money from a investment portfolio that is down because of market movement, that can really impact your psyche and it can cause a
Yep.
lot of stress. And so talk about some of the things that we have, especially from our retirement planning software, that allow us to show people variable versus fixed, and then maybe touch on some of the different areas like Social Security and pensions and everything like that.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of my favorite kind of slides that I would showcase to clients. And we have some technology where you can actually go in and make modifications on the fly, which is very important to kind of see how things are affected. But the one chart that I'm thinking of is basically it just shows you your withdrawal rate based not only on a percentage, but also on a dollar amount. And it also breaks down, okay, here's the income that you have that's from stable sources, like you mentioned, Social Security, pensions, annuities. And then here's what's variable. Here's what you have to draw out from the portfolio. And what I love to do is like kind of really get under the hood with a client and understand, okay, what are your fixed expenses? And then what are your discretionary expenses? Think like vacations, things like that, and showcase to them, hey, if those fixed expenses are covered by, call it, stable sources of income, then you can actually deal with a little bit more market fluctuation. And I go through that, David, because I just want clients to feel comfortable during periods of market volatility, to know that they have this stable source of income that they can rely upon that's going to cover those fixed type of expenses. The other thing I'll touch on, there's a lot of misnomers out there about Social Security. It's so important. I stress that people look at it like a pension that's inflation adjusted and lasts for a lifetime. Like, it's such a powerful piece to someone's portfolio, and having the discussion to understand when you should claim and how you can kind of create the maximum benefit based off of Social Security is very important. I always love pensions. We work with a lot of teachers. They're invaluable to say the least. And then annuities, I think they get a bad rap out there, but I think they're right for some. I really do. If you could use an annuity to cover some of those fixed expenses that give people that benefit, that psychological benefit to allow maybe, portions of their account to grow with the market, no matter the volatility, it could be a very powerful piece to the puzzle.
So you kind of stole my thunder a little bit. I was going to ask you about, excuse me, I was going to ask you about if somebody had a low percentage of stable to variable income as part of the projections that we're running, what are some things that we can do to shift them from low stable percentage to higher stable percentage? And annuities is one of the easiest things to do in that case. And as you said, annuities get a bad rap either inside the industry, outside the industry, because sometimes they are used as is an improper vehicle for what the
Yep.
ultimate end goal is. And if you use it correctly, it's
Mhm.
essentially just offloading the risk of market fluctuation to an insurance company that is guaranteeing that you are going to be paid out the remainder of your life once you annuitize. It's as simple as that. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. There doesn't need to be a million riders on things. And, we can do a whole episode on annuities, but it solves a problem for people, and that problem could be, I want to guarantee a more stable source of income on top of my Social Security benefits. And so the big takeaway is that just because an annuity that either was sold to you or that your friend got sold wasn't right for that situation doesn't mean that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And the one thing I love that we do is, like, no matter what a client is invested in, we want them to understand what those investments do, how they act, and then also how they play a part in their overall portfolio. And we try and bring everything together so that clients understand what's within their portfolio and why we're using these different pieces to kind of help them achieve long-term success. So I can't agree with you more. Don't throw the baby out of the bathwater with annuities. Definitely, if it's right for you, let's have the discussion.
Don't throw any babies anywhere. I mean, that's just great, good rule of thumb.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. When I was actually saying that, I was like, "Oh man, did I get that right?"
Don't throw any babies anywhere. That's a good place to start.
No, not good.
When we talk about the fixed sources of income,
Mhm.
one strategy might be to line up how much money do you need on a regular basis to pay for like a mortgage or regular living expenses. And then if you want to guarantee that money to be paid from your stable sources of income, that there might be an opportunity to do that. And then the rest of it is just gravy on top, and you can participate in the long-term growth of the market. We can also approach the idea of providing a stable source of income, especially for your projected expenses for the next few years,
Yep.
via what we refer to as a bucket strategy.
Mhm.
Take a second, talk to people about what a bucket strategy is, how we would structure it, and then how it would also benefit them in as it relates to the discussion today, but also as it relates to we're going through some market volatility right now. How does that help people get through those times?
Yeah. So you have three different buckets: short, intermediate, and long term. Short term bucket, think of that as investments like cash or money markets, things that really don't have much fluctuation in value. And that short-term bucket, that is meant to cover your overall expenses. So clients know, I have this short-term bucket. It's not going to fluctuate much with the market and it's there to cover my expenses. So it's great from a psychological benefit. Second's the intermediate term bucket. So this is a little bit further out. And I look at this bucket, it's filled with things like bonds, right? Or types of fixed income instruments that just don't fluctuate as much as, call it, like stocks do. And the idea with that bucket is fixed income bonds, right? They produce income, and that income can actually be used to replenish the short term bucket, right? To kind of continue to replenish that bucket to cover your expenses. And then finally, of the long term bucket. And the long-term bucket is mostly filled with more aggressive type investments, think stocks. And at that point, like you are looking for long-term growth, you're looking for inflation protection, but each of the buckets works together because you're basically replenishing each as you're starting to spend from, call it, that short-term bucket. And I think overall, knowing that you have cash on hand to cover expenses, whether that be a year or 2 years, will help, you ride out the storm when the market gets volatile because you understand the strategy and you're not like, focusing and seeing your whole account drop when the market experiences some volatility. I'd love to hear kind of, David, your like kind of approach with the bucket strategy and how you kind of look at that from more so like the investment management side.
The early bucket is pretty easy. As you said, cash, money market, we don't want that to fluctuate in value at all. So think of that as your savings account at a local bank, hopefully paying some interest rates being where they are. You can actually get some interest off of that versus a few years past where it was zero. Make
Right.
sure that you are squeezing every dime that you can out of it, though. Evaluate your options for that short-term bucket. You can probably get around 4% right now on that short-term money.
Mm,
That middle bucket is really where our portfolio management can come in and assist because, as you mentioned, it's typically filled with bonds, but the structure of that bucket is very important to the point where you want to make sure that in a year that you need a certain dollar amount, you have an asset that's going to match that
mm,
liability. And
right.
what I mean by that is, let's say that you tell us that you need $50,000 from your investments. Maybe there's some other sources like Social Security that we talked about, but let's say you need $50,000 in a given year. And so we have the short term bucket filled with 1 to 2 years. We'll take $50,000 of your investment portfolio, buy a bond or something that's similar that's going to mature in 3 years with a face value of around $50,000. So that way, you know that in 3 years, that contractual obligation, which is exactly what a bond is, that is going to be repaid, and you're getting interest along the way for that investment as well. So not only are you generating income up to that year three in this example, but year three comes around, that bond matures, and now you get the principal amount that funds your retirement for that year. And as we've talked about on other episodes, we want to think about this as like a waterfall effect. And so the long-term growth, that's the main driver of the portfolio, the growth that's going to be associated with the stock market and the bond market and giving you that long-term potential. And as that money grows, it's flowing down to the next closest bucket, which is that middle term. And then that as those mature, they fund your immediate spending needs. So it's a nice waterfall effect. I've made the analogy before. It's like the champagne waterfalls that you see at those fancy weddings. I've never attended any of those, but it's a good visual to just show how that long-term growth funds the next lower bucket, which funds then your immediate spending needs. And that's the best way that we can manage people's behavioral biases during
Yeah.
market volatility, because we we haven't experienced, other than COVID maybe, there hasn't really been a period of time where the market was like the global financial crisis in
Mm,
2008, when even a balanced portfolio was down 35% in that year. And that is something that is going to cause a lot of stress and anxiety for retirees. Especially like you retire day one of 2008 and you watch your investment portfolio
yeah.
in a boring 60-40 portfolio go down 35%. Chances are you're going to shave a few years off your life just by worrying about that. And so
Right.
what we're trying to do is to structure the investments in such a way so that that does not factor into as much as possible. You're still going to worry about the state of the world and the economy, but we want to take as much of that anxiety off of your plate as we project out your spending needs for the entirety of your retirement.
Yeah, I love that. Great explanation. What I appreciate about Continuum too is we all have like our own lanes. So a lot of times I'm diving into the spending strategies and such, and then we're working together to make sure that, we can leverage the portfolio to actually follow along with, said spending strategy. So I appreciate that we kind of all are working together with each client to really make this happen. It takes an army at the end of the day.
That's a great point. And we are all I would call us specialists in our given lane. And that's why we're very happy to have Pat on board as the person who loves digging into those cash flow projections. He loves digging into this financial planning. I love the investment side of the business, but together we are there to be a team for our clients to take all of the burden off of
Yep.
their plates so they can enjoy their retirement. I don't think any retiree really wants to sit around reading updates on Social Security or reading updates from new legislation about retirement accounts. We want to do all that. We love that stuff, as weird as that might be to some people. That's what really drives us, and that's why we are in our chosen profession. Finally, we talked last time about the different spending strategy, or at least the projection of how much money that you're going to need. And it
Yep.
dovetails nicely into when you're spending the money, how can you expect that money to be flowing out of your account? And maybe how do you plan for that from dollars and cents? I need this amount of money every year. And how is that projection or how's that picture going to look for people?
Yeah. So there's a couple different like strategies that you can actually cover in terms of like retirement spending. Let's talk a little bit about like the retirement smile. I think that one will be helpful. So we brought it up a little bit on the last podcast, but I do want to bring it up again. Essentially, think of a smile. You've got your go go, you've got your slow go, and then your no go years. When you think about the beginning of someone's retirement, or let's call it their financial independence, at that point, they're probably going to be a little bit more active. There's going to be more on the plate for them. There might be more vacations. There might be home relocation, but you name it. You want to be able to kind of flex your spending and spend more so that you can enjoy those times and not feel ratcheted down by your portfolio. And then in the slow go years, typically, you're looking at age like 75, 80, your spending starts to slow down a little bit. You're just not as active. And then finally in the no-go years, retirement spending starts to tick back up, typically due to healthcare. But I like looking at that because what we try to do at Continuum is to allow you to live the best lifestyle that you can throughout each of those years. And a lot of times it's, can we actually tap into the portfolio a little bit more when you are more active so that you have more flexibility and you can truly enjoy your nest egg that you've worked so hard to attain?
I've heard it said before, and I really like it. It's the freedom to spend the money that you've saved because
Yeah.
you can't take the money with you. Yes, you
Yep.
can leave it to charity, you can leave it to heirs, which are fantastic goals for people
Mhm.
to have, but you also don't want to live your retirement in fear that you're going to run out of money. And
Yeah.
so if we can help people spend the money and enjoy the vacations that they've always wanted to go on, or to maybe move to a warmer location, something that is always been on their bucket list. We don't want them to worry about running out of money as a piece of that. We will
Right.
work with you to help you plan not only the planning part and the projection, but then also once that time comes, how do we structure our investments? How do we help you with that withdrawal so that you feel comfortable taking money and spending it because it's yours. You worked really hard for it, and then you deserve to enjoy it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's just the beauty of having like a robust financial plan. I get a lot of questions from clients. Like the main concern is they're going to outlive money. But then when you could show them, hey, we ran 1,000 scenarios. We're planning out to age 95, if not more, depending on family longevity. And we've uncovered how much you can pull from the portfolio to have sustainable rates of withdrawals. Like having that on paper and going through that, I think is just so important. Because at the end of each of those conversations, like my goal is to give you the confidence to know how much you can spend so that you can live the lifestyle that you're looking to live.
And it's not a one-time thing. It's not,
No.
here's the projection at day one of retirement. You're good to go. We'll talk to you in 30 years.
Yep.
We want to be revisiting this conversation at least once a year, maybe once every other year, if there's not a ton that's changing, because life changes. Think about 30, 40 years ago, what the world looked like, what your personal situation looked like, and think about all the changes that have occurred in between that. There's going to be things that change. I always joke that as soon as I give somebody that retirement projection or the financial analysis, I say everything in here is incorrect.
Yeah.
And people take a step back because I'm just telling them that what I've worked so hard to put in front of them is all incorrect because I have no idea what the inflation rate's going to be or investments are going to return over a given period of time. I don't have that information. The best that we can do is have a starting point and then make adjustments along the way. So what we do is that hand holding or that guidance along the way so that as things change, we adjust because this is a dynamic process.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's not only, we can make adjustments on the fly as life changes. We also want to put a plan that like we can understand as a team. Like this is a team effort. Right. And if we put a plan in front of a client and they don't understand it, it means nothing. So like we want to ensure that we have something baked in that they, not only feel confident in to give them that flexibility, but they can follow along and we can make adjustments along the way. I mean, it's a journey. It ain't a one-time event.
Yeah, and I also want to touch on the idea of there's a big difference between knowledge and implementation. And if somebody gives you a financial plan that has all the fancy numbers and graphs, and there's a lot of knowledge baked into that projection, the actual implementation, I think, is really where the rubber meets the road, and that's truly where the value is going to come because
Yeah.
you can have that document in front of you and then try to do it on your own, and you run into potentially paying higher taxes or being invested incorrectly or not coordinating with Social Security and Medicare and
Mhm.
everything else that goes into a retiree's life. That's where I think the true value really comes is, yes, the projections are great, but at the same time, we wanna make sure that the implementation is on point.
Yeah, and that's what I try to do. So like I love to go through the plan. I mean, it's a big passion of mine. So I like to get in there. I like to ensure that the client understands it so that they can feel confident in it. But then at the end, I always like have like one document full of recommendations. Right. And we have the discussion. What's a priority? Like, are you coming up to Medicare age? Let's get that figured out, right? Before we move on to the next thing. But having that document, I think, is the most valuable thing because I'm a pest and I'll continue to follow up on it. But then it just creates a clear roadmap of what's needed. Because again, it's a journey. You're not going to do this all in one day. Like it does take time, but we work together at it.
You mentioned Medicare. I think this is a good spot to stop this
Yeah.
episode and tease what we're gonna talk about in the next episode, and that is healthcare in retirement. And it is such an important topic because first, I think that a lot of financial advisors are looked at from the outside as investment managers. And that is a big piece of what we do, yes. However, there is so much more that goes into a retiree's retirement and Medicare, medical expenses. That is going to be a very big part, especially given the trajectory of medical costs. And so, helping people coordinate with that is something we'll talk about next time. Make sure that if you are finding value in what we are doing, make sure that you subscribe to our podcast. If you're on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe on there. Be notified of current episodes. We want to be putting these out every couple weeks, maybe more frequently than that if we really get rolling on that. So make sure that you are signed up for updates because we want to be a valuable resource for you as you progress through your retirement years or if you're coming up to retirement knowing that you have that knowledge, or at least that we're piquing your interest in some areas.
Yeah, two things. First off, if you're tuning in, thank you. We appreciate it. We hope you find value in it. And second off, like to add on to David's comment there, if there's something that you want to hear, or if there's a topic that you want us to go deep on, let us know. Like that would be a joy to David and I, is if we got a topic that we can kind of run with that's top of mind for you. And we'll make sure we put it into the coffer and we get it done.
Yeah. So with that, we look forward to coming out with another episode for you. And as Pat said, reach out to us with comments or feedback. We love to hear from
Yep.
you guys. Take care.
Thank you.